Thank you so much for joining us today, ladies and gentlemen. And this is a conversation we need to be having more frequently. And clearly, because of initiatives like Savi, we are seeing a lot of changes on the ground, more conversations about greater representation of women, not just on the shop floor, but in boardrooms as well. But as we've seen, the change has not really happened fast enough. Let's look at some latest statistics. Despite making up 39% of the global labor workforce, if you look at the traditional energy sector, the representation of women there is only 16%. When you look at boardrooms and top managerial positions, the numbers are even lower. The latest report by Bain and Company on the UK energy sector tells us that there are just about 3 UK energy companies which have a female CEO. Only 4 UK companies which have a woman as the chair of the board. There was a report by the World Bank recently about the power transition in the Pacific. And that said, while 18% of the labor force is women in the power sector, in the Pacific region, only 10% of the engineers are women. Clearly, there is a lot of work to do, but good that we are having those conversations. So let's open this up immediately. Let me go across to Mansi first. Mansi, when we speak about the energy sector, why is there this gender workforce gap?
Well, very good morning, everyone, and absolutely happy to be here. And big thanks to USISPF for inviting me, and very, very glad to meet Vartika finally. I guess it's a big question in terms of, and I guess the one word which I would like to put is the total ecosystem. And I think most of the times, we start with, okay, fine, we just need the numbers, which is what you quote. But I think what is more important is the inclusion part of the overall equation, which then spoils the thing. And I'll give you just a very small example. In our Shell retail stations, we started with an initiative to have an all-women retail stations. So these are our petrol pumps. And, again, a very male-dominated part of the ecosystem. And we started off like by 5 years back, we said, okay, we want an all-women staff to be running it. So it was fine. Initially you can think, fine, you get women who are interested, you get into the recruitment, and hopefully it will find it itself. But the reality is that till the time you don't go to the depth of, what are the issues which these 11 women will face on a day-to-day basis, how will they come here? What time will they go back? What is needed? Who will take care of the people back end? And also then a career opportunity as to what happens after they do a couple of years over the retail station. You have to think through that overall ecosystem, and it's not just getting one woman. It's about then saying, okay, how do we create that overall space? And I think once we started solving these problems, what we realized is that from one, now we have 11 stations which are running absolutely fully with all women staff. And we've been able to overcome that, right? But the answer is that, it's creating that end-to-end ecosystem, which will be the key to the vision which we all have.
Right. Ms. Vartika, if I were to ask you, what are the larger changes that we need to make at a policy level in companies, in the energy sector, in public sector units? The reason why I'm asking is that very often when we speak about making policies which the company is going to live by over the next 10, 15 years, those policies are often made or have been made 10 years ago by a boardroom full of men or by lawmakers who were all men. So what do we need to change in terms of the thinking, in terms of policy, so that the recruitment strategy, the ethos, the sentiment behind hiring, retaining talent, all has this motivation to bridge the gender gap?
Thank you, Parikshit. And first of all, I'm delighted to be part of this panel. And I thank USISPF and Savi for making this happen. Delighted to meet Mansi as well. And all the lovely audience, the ladies and the gentlemen in the room. Yes, indeed, the energy sector has been challenged in terms of diversity gap. Largely because traditionally the engineering field itself, to begin with, had less percentage of women. Not so now, and we don't see that going in the backward direction any further as we go along, as more and more girls are actually excited to have a career in energy space and engineering. When you speak particularly, and you mentioned the public sector space, the government sector, I believe talent has no gender, and that is the belief of many of our companies and many of the leadership. In order to grow, in order to develop, in order to innovate as we go in the future, uh, every leadership, every management wants the best talent on the table. And the policies, particularly in the public sector space, one, are uniform for both men and women. They do not distinguish between genders in terms of pay packages, structures, in terms of how you climb up the ladder, how you perform. So that's a uniformity which is a given. Now, in that setting, looking at HR practices, looking at having women come back in a certain period of their life back into the system to continue their evolution as a professional. These are policies which many of even my company has and many of the other public sectors have. Reskilling, upskilling, the mentee-mentor programs, these are all very important aspects to continue that women are a part and in equal percentages. Now, that percentage is still very skewed. And at the end of the day, when they move up the ladder, it becomes difficult to find people, women specifically, to take up key positions. But I'll be happy to share that in our company, we have women who lead departments, who are at just below board level. And we're looking at women to come into the board level. It's not just the men in the boardroom, but also people like us who have had the, both the mentorship in our careers as well as the desire and the determination to be there. And once you're there, as was spoken, you kind of make the change. So this change is very rapid. It is happening, as Mansi shared. There are some of our refineries of my sister companies who are completely manned. The whole plant is manned by women, 24/7. So these are changes which are there and there to stay. And we are very hopeful that these interventions, these kind of ingrained policies, which are only getting better, will open more avenues for women to become, a larger percentage in the energy space.
No, you're absolutely right. And when we speak about the new energy sector, I think that allows companies to start afresh because we visited plants of separate electric vehicle manufacturers and we see shop floors which are completely manned by women. And that definitely is a very encouraging sign. But Mansi, if I were to ask you, we have been reading reports, and I'd like to ask you, to what extent is this correct as of now? Wages for female employees are almost 20% lower than for male employees. Where are we seeing this, and to what extent, and till what level in an organization can this be correct?
Yeah, so I guess, depends on, there is obviously many reports on this one globally, locally, and the good part is that there is a very high awareness on the issue. And from a larger policy perspective, now the companies not only have to declare, what they are doing from, say, for example, their climate, their financials, but also what they're doing on the just gender, equality in that sense. For example, our company is supposed to share our wage on an average to ensure that there is no disbalance, just as an example. So the change is happening, and there could be a variety of different reasons in the past why it would be happening. But I guess the good part is that now, with the very high sense of awareness, both in the management, in the policy making, and in the population, there is that very strong high bar which needs to be ensured that we do these checks. In fact, in a lot of the companies, from an HR point of view, there are many checks and balances which are now put in to ensure that when we are trying to, say, do a rating session at the end of the year, it's done on merit, but in the end, you just check that is there any, unassumed bias which has been put in, that, you don't have equal representation of people who are performing highly, right? At the same time, when we are now going to the level when we are looking at an yearly our rewards and recognition program as well, we are trying to ensure that, it's again, there is no unconscious bias, because a lot of times it's not about consciously you're trying to do it. It just at times creeps in. And then you catch yourself and say, what is right, what is not right, etc. So the bottom line is that how strongly do we feel about the topic? I think once that awareness is high, the companies figure it out how to manage it. So the challenge is really more about what kind of an ethos the company is trying to, what kind of a culture, what kind of a platform we are trying to present. And once that is very clear, I think the rest of the organization starts following it.
Right. Ms. Vartika, if I were to ask you about the need for mentorship in all organizations across the board, how important is that, especially for women who aspire to grow up the ladder? Women may have to take career breaks from time to time. You lose momentum. And even after you return, say post pregnancy, there is a time period that you need a certain amount of flexibility in. It's tough. It's not easy handling a kid at home, things in the household, your work, your targets, the competition. It's not easy at all. So, how important is mentorship for women? Somebody to handhold them through this exercise so that they don't reach a point where they say it's better for me to get out of the workforce for the moment and maybe get back a few years later.
So permit me to just touch upon the aspect of the pay disparity that you mentioned before I get onto this answer. I was reading Sheryl Sandberg's Lean In, and it is always that when women go and look for a position, they assume that what they are paid or what they're offered is enough. I would, highly recommend to the aspiring women here, ask for more. And she did that. So do not think that what you're offered is what you are worth. You're worth a lot more. That's the first message I would like to give women. Please do not think that what you have got is enough. And from that, when you ask the question of, permit me to be a little deviant in my answers, the responsibility of bringing up children is not just women. And therein, we need the partnership, we need the support of the father also. And I must say that today, our times were different. Our times were tough. I am at least 1.5 generations above most of the young ladies that I see here. And it was different in terms of the distribution of responsibilities. It is not so today. The boys today, the children that we have raised, they are much more collaborative in their approach to sharing responsibilities, particularly of bringing up children. Having said that, I have no doubts that the stress on the women is a lot more.
That's what I meant. I completely get your point that you have to have shared parenting.
Yes.
But there is a problem that is there across the board, even though we want to change the mindset.
Yes. So a lot depends on oneself as well. So I can give my example. We don't have extended family in Delhi. And when both my children were young, we ended up with no savings. We used to have a lot of support at home, plan A, plan B, plan C, because I used to travel as well, being in the sector that I am. But the determination to continue on your professional career is one of the driving force to create solutions around you. Some of them may work, some of them you may have to, reposition, kind of redo. But it is also to ensure that that one single agenda that you will continue on your professional career remains the focus of your, kind of career path. On the company's front, companies today, as our company as well, is we recognize that when women come back, they have had a break of 6 months. They may have even had a break of 8-9 months because they take extended leave. But to make sure that they are back again into the system, we do specific programs for them to kind of make sure that they get back into the groove. And it is hand holding on both sides, you know, a step from their side and more steps from the company's side, which actually, make sure that they continue in the system. And within a couple of years, the opportunities that they take, I think their careers in the long run, it doesn't matter. It really doesn't matter. The 6 months, 8 months break once or twice in your career doesn't matter at all. You can always bounce back into the mainstream and take up leadership positions as you go on.
No, great to hear that, ma'am. But how do we, Mansi, change that across the board? One thing is to have a mindset at managerial levels in an organization, and the other is at the shop floor, or maybe at the entry level positions in the market, people who are working on the ground, in the field, in different places. So how do we make sure in the context of India, we're able to change the culture, the thinking, not just at the top, but from top to bottom?
Yeah, so I think you're asking like, how do we change the fabric, yeah, and the DNA of a company to be more inclusive, to be more equitable, more diverse in that sense. And I guess in my mind, first of all, it starts with every individual who's working. Let's start with women ourselves, right? To say that, how do we prove ourselves in a manner that it's the best talent part, right? So I think, how are we the best talent? And we don't go through that journey all the time of like that assessment of like, is she good? Is she not good? I talk about that model of like every time a woman has to go for a new job or a new place or a new interview or a new like position, it's always going through that check and balance of like, is she good enough, right? But I think, how do we prepare ourselves through that, our talent is definitely strong. At the same time, I think from a bottom point of view, it is really also catching the moments where, you see that things are not going right, you call them out, right? So, for example, like I was mentoring one of the ladies, and she said, look, I joined this new group, and they went out, they never called me, and I'm feeling very excluded. I don't think it's all boys and they're not including me, right? That was kind of like the setup she was trying to get me on. And I was like, okay, fine, we'll talk about what they should do, but tell me, what did you do in this situation? I felt quite bad and I was grumpy and da da da. I was like, I again asked, so what did you do in this situation? So, I mean, then she reflected and said, no, probably I didn't do anything. And I said, aha, you could have called it out and said, guys, you all are going out. What about me? Or said to one person and da da da, and found a solution around it. So it's a lot about, I think in the situations where we feel that it's not parity or things are not doing right or it's not to the level which we feel the standards need to be, I would again, have an ask to say, call it out. Be it your peers, be it your manager, be it the ecosystem. And I think we have to carry that voice, because if we are suffering or if there's something not right, till the time we don't bring it forward, I guess we are asking too much from the ecosystem to solve for it, right? So I think calling it out in 99% of the time, I don't think anybody has a wrong intent to say we don't want women or we don't want this to happen. It is a lot about either unconscious bias, or it is a lot about, it was not there in the ecosystem, right? So I think second thing which I would say is, just calling it out. I think third, obviously, the voice from the top is very important, right? If the culture of the organization doesn't talk about that we need diversity, doesn't demonstrate in action by the kind of leadership they have or their own words. I think in the morning, the ambassador had a very nice, he said, we went to the doctor and he just caught himself in that moment and said, he and she, right? And I think it is those micro moments where you set up the culture to say, okay, I don't say that if it's a doctor, it's a he. And having that always a self-aware, a conscious mindset, which then runs through the organization in that sense. So I would say it's a very much a combination of the women themselves, their responsibility, the leadership, and then the ecosystem to then quickly adapt and then say, okay, how do we ensure that we all are creating that ecosystem?
Right. To speak out more. Speak out more. That's important. Ms. Vartika, again, if we were to ask you from your own example, and not just about public sector units in the country, but uh, at an industry level across India, when we speak about the energy sector, what are some of the programs that one can inculcate to make sure that women are given more space to speak out and also rise to the top, mentor them better, upskill them better, make sure that when they return after a break, they are given the right opportunities to get back in momentum.
See, energy sector, particularly
And why is the
today,
energy sector slightly different? Why are we
Yeah.
talking about it
Sure.
specifically compared to other sectors?
Sure, sure. See, the rapid changes which are happening in the energy sector today are difficult to catch up, even for well-informed, well-positioned individuals, even leadership, companies. They're all struggling to find their, spaces and relevance in the very fast-changing environment. So if you're in the power sector, you need to go to renewables. If you're in renewables, you need to see storages. If you are in the oil and gas, you need to decarbonize. You want to go to net zero. If you are in, something related to computing, you need to do quant computing. You have the AI, there are so many changes, and everybody is asking management these questions. How are you positioning yourself as a company in these kind of areas? And so there is a lot of stress and a lot of need to, showcase that transformation also. Now, in that, every individual man or woman, whoever our talent pool is, needs to also look at this as a skill or how to position themselves in this changing environment. So, one is the company themselves who need to kind of consciously look at programs which are in the space of fast moving changes of technology and innovation in the energy sector, as well as for individuals. So, I always believe that one must always sit back and see where is it that you would like to see yourself in the next 5 years? Where is it that, what is your ultimate goal? Once you start, questioning or looking at inward also, one may even find that the sector you are in or the expertise that you are building is not going to be there in 5 years. I can do this better. So that kind of exposure for women, particularly, is important to be given by the organization so that they can also kind of discover themselves. Maybe they need to reposition themselves. And there are in all organizations today a kind of outward looking, a lot of programs, lot of training sessions where the horizontal training is carried out in different areas, particularly in the energy sector. Energy sector is not as, and it's all, every day transforming itself also. So that kind of pace that is in the sector needs to be also ingrained in the employees and the women in particular. So that kind of horizontal exposure is extremely, extremely important. Both, as Mansi said, is on one, ownership is on oneself as well, as much as it is to the organization. Because it is only when both the, the women as well as the employers or their own aspirations kind of bridge this gap. Can you have magic? Can you actually have that accelerated pace of growth and opportunities open up for furthering your careers?
You're absolutely right, because when we speak about energy transition now, sustainability, and when we now speak about sustainability, we're talking about sustainable manufacturing practices across the board in a company, not just the kind of fuel you're using or the kind of electricity whether using is whether it's coming from green sources or not. As we take this transition forward, Mansi, what do you think organizations like USAID, which is a part of the US government, and an industry body like USISPF can do to further this cause together, make sure we are able to make a real impact on the ground?
Yeah. So again, I think again, a lot of great work is happening. So again, want to congratulate the team, and I've been witnessing how they are also working at a very grassroots level to enable a lot of change. And the book, I'm sure, will have a lot more inspiration, and I'm looking forward to reading it. But I guess what can these kind of organizations in general do is a very good question, because there are companies who are doing their own thing. There's like so much of ecosystem which is there. I think one is a lot about cross-industry mentorship. I think that's a very big gap right now, because the exposure which needs to happen cross industries is not very organic. It's very difficult for us to reach out because of antitrust and this and that. And I think some of these organizations can absolutely help. And we need that exposure, because the perspective which both the male allies as well as the women need to have, both in terms of best practices. So I think there's a lot happening in many companies. We were talking about the women's transition. The womanhood or the marriage is one, parenthood is another, but then menopause, and now the women are saying, how do I freeze my eggs? Because they are like, it's an ever evolving policy landscape, right?
So I would say mental
Uh,
health breaks.
Mental
And
health,
that's important for both
exactly.
men and women. But
Exactly.
yeah,
Yeah.
that's
And
it.
I think surrogacy and so on. And there's like, and now with LGBTQ, same gender partners, the space is ever evolving, right? So one company might have already thought through what needs to be done in these situations, what are the best policies. So we don't have to reinvent the wheel, all of us, right? If there's a good policy on looking at everything on same gender marriages, or on, how do we freeze our eggs, it might be much easier for the rest of the industry to cut and paste and evolve it for them, rather to discover and go from the scratch on, from
Have a template
insurance to
ready.
this. Exactly. So I think the second piece is like a lot of policy sharing could be another area where we can go much faster in this space as we can. I think the third one is like opportunities for small projects or things where again you need a different perspective, where if it can be facilitated in the low touch manner would be another area, because there's so much of projects which are happening in various, and you might require different skill set which may not be available immediately within your company but could be readily available somewhere else. And to have a way by which we can have internships which can then facilitate on-the-job training could be another area. So I think those three, are very practical to my mind and can be done, if we put our minds to it. Yeah.
Right. No, great to hear that. And Ms. Vartika, your thoughts on the same, and also on talent retention. At sometimes at a very young level, you're able to spot that a particular employee has a lot of talent, and you feel that that person can go a long way in his or her career. How do you make sure that the organization spots the talent at the right time and continues to invest in that talent? And here, in this context, we're especially asking about women employees.
In fact, today all organizations are about talent. And retaining talent is, I think, the toughest part of all of us. Retaining them, keeping them engaged. So, first of all, spotting them. Now, for spotting them, I believe that leaders, top level, heads must interact a lot more and have a lot of projects or kind of multidisciplinary in-house activities which evolve into some kind of improvements within. Like for our company, we are not a manufacturing company, but we have adopted practices of quality circle. So that kind of engages the individuals of different departments, builds the teams within them, and also looks at them being satisfied with their own kind of contribution to the organization. So it's a lot about personal satisfaction as well, not just the remuneration part, but also about personal satisfaction. The second aspect is for a lot of sectors, employees feel that they are doing the same thing all over again. So it's the routineness of activities particularly in some of the sectors that are there, I wouldn't like to name them, it becomes a little routine, kind of, it's not as exciting for the employee to continue. So companies like ours who take up projects worldwide, who look at different sectors, whether it's refinery, petrochemical, sustainable sector, green, biofuel, infrastructure. So for every employee who is part of the team, it's a different experience. It's like a different company, different client, different geography. So it keeps them excited. So it is upon us to make sure that they are multi-skilled. And they also are rotated within the organization, keeping themselves as in the same maybe or a different department, as well as laterally moving them. And that's one part of leadership. And for that, even it's important for women to recognize that. Because mostly, many times, we get into a comfort zone. And many times, for us to move from what we are doing for a long time becomes very discomforting, very alien, and it's like protecting yourself. So it's not going out of that limits. So it is both on individuals as well as on the company to pull such people out who are talented, recognize them, give them skills which are lateral skills. Because if you have to go up on the leadership ladders, we need multi-skilling. And in that way, even as was mentioned by Mansi, the multi-skilling aspects of leadership, which maybe USISPF or USDD can kind of inculcate, because, and in that I would just add a context of global exposure, because it's no longer in your boundaries. The lucky part of a company like ours is because we work with companies who are international licensors, we work in different geographies, we interact with different clients. So, but naturally you get exposed. Cultures of companies, cultures of different countries are very different. The decision-making process is very different. So that kind of richness, which if it is brought to the employee, the talent is retained. And that if consciously our HR and our training department kind of structures in with the management, it becomes a lot more attractive to a person to stay on in a long term in a particular organization.
All right. Now, my final thoughts that we'll take from our panelists as we come to the close of this session. Mansi, if I were to ask you for your final thoughts as to one change that you'd like to bring about for the greater good of women employees, their growth in your organization, what would that be?
Think big and put in your best behind it. Yeah. A lot of times I just feel that, the barrier is not outside, the barrier is inside. And my big, kind of like ask from all women is to not constrain their thinking, not constrain their ambition, not constrain their dream, but just think big and, things will happen.
Right. Ms. Vartika.
So I'm going to give an example, probably extended from what Mansi mentioned. Many, many years ago, when I was a very young employee in EIL, we had hardly any women in the engineering, hardly anybody. And I have spoken about this at several occasions. I would sit in the room and I would see my male counterparts giving all the ideas I had in my head. And you're making all the brownie points with the bosses. And it was only after a few years that I realized, well, you have to speak for yourself. And there's no harm to be unobtrusive, but assertive enough to put your point across. And that is something which I think is upon women. And the other part I would say is there is no harm in walking up and asking. Because many times the male, with due regards to all the men in the room, they do not realize that this opportunity is to be given to certain employees who are incidentally women. So on that, I would again cite one of my examples. I was about 3 years into the organization, and I've stayed with the same organization all my life after my graduation. there was a plant which was under commissioning. And our industrial plants is a very rough road. Rough road in the sense it's all the dirt and the dust and the men and the labor and the contractors and all that. It's very difficult. So I wanted to go for commissioning, and we were 5 of us in that group who was looking at that project. All the 4 boys had gone except me. So I asked, first I was reluctant. Then one of my colleagues who joined with me told me, you go and ask. He prompted me, I didn't go on my own. Then he prompted me, I went and asked my manager. And at that time, our managers you could not talk to. They were like that. Today we are more conversational. You can walk up, it's an open door policy. You can send a WhatsApp also, we will be able to, kind of address it. And I walked up to him and asked him, look, sir, this is the plant. I looked at the drawings, I looked at the PNIDs, now it's in commissioning, I want to go. So he didn't even look up, and but he didn't send me to that plant. But another few months later, there was another plant which was to be commissioned, and he did put me there as part of the team. So please ask, my message is, do not hesitate. It may seem awkward, and I'm happy to say today we ask, women ask. And please continue to do that in a larger way.
Lovely thoughts to end on. Thank you so much, both Vartika and Mansi, for joining us here and giving us your thoughts on such an important topic.